When performing linear or quadratic regressions on data, you have to first start by entering the data. If you push the Stat button and then Enter to edit, you'll see that in List 1 and List 2, I've put two sets of data. The first set is 5 foot lengths for females in centimeters with the respective centimeters. If you push second y equals, you can get into the stat plot option. So if I push enter, I can turn on the stat plot and you can select the scatter plot, selecting the two lists that the x and the y values come from, and you can mark it the way you like and a certain color. If you now turn on Zoom 9, if you push Zoom 9, it will focus in on that data, and you can see how maybe a linear regression or possibly a quadratic regression might fit data. Go back home and push the Stat button and go over to Count. 4 or 8 will find a linear regression. Apparently, statisticians prefer that form of SOAP intercept. I'll use option 4, and I've already selected list 1 and list 2 to be the two lists where the x and the y values are being compared. Leave the frequently list blank. I am going to ask for the regression equation to be stored in y sub 1 so that I can graph it. If I push bars and go over to y vars and select function, I'll select y sub 1, and when I'm done, it will store it there. Earlier, I did go into diagnostics and go into the catalog and turn diagnostics on, and the factory settings does not have diagnostics on, so it will not show a Pearson correlation coefficient unless you do turn on the diagnostics. Here, when you calculate, not only does it find the slope and the y-intercept for the linear regression, but even tells you the relative Pearson's correlation coefficient, which is below 0.9 here. When you push a y-editor, it automatically pastes that, so you can see how it's now graphing the line that best fits that data. If you go back to your home screen and then go into the stat editor and go over to calc, there's also a quad regression there, as well as many other regressions. You can scroll through the list. Option 5, it's still again going to regress on list 1 and list 2, leaving frequency list blank. This time I'd like to store the regression equation in y sub 2, so I can graph both of the functions simultaneously. If you push vars and go over to y vars and push function, I'm going to select option 2, and it will paste the regression function in. I will calculate, and it only gives you the square of the Pearson correlation coefficient. But if you want to find Pearson's correlation coefficient, you can find the square root of r squared, which is stored in the vars command. So if you push vars in option 5 for statistics, and then over to the menu EQ, you'll notice that option 9 has Pearson correlation coefficient squared. So if you square root it, you'll see that this is a much better value for Pearson's correlation coefficient. And now that we look at the y editor, it's pasted the quadratic, linear, and coefficients, as well as the constant for that quadratic. You can probably get rid of a lot of decimals so it doesn't look so obnoxious. When you graph it, it will now plot both the linear regression and the quadratic regression, and I'm sure you can see visually why the quadratic regression looks better on this data.